Hello. Welcome to the ILS webinar, How to Get From Here to BIBFRAME. This is the fourth in the series, From Here to BIBFRAME. I'm Felicity Dykes from the University of Missouri. I'm a member of the ILS Continuing Education Committee and will be your host for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Carl Stahmer. Carl is Director of Digital Scholarship at the University of California, Davis. He has worked in the area of linked data for many years and has participated in several research studies funded by major government and foundation funders. He's knowledgeable and enthusiastic about today's topic, and we're fortunate to have him here with us today. There are a few things to keep in mind for today's presentation. All attendees are muted, so if you have questions for Carl, please type them into the question box on your screen, and Carl will answer them at the end of his presentation. Our software doesn't have interactive chat capabilities. However, we have a hashtag you can use if you want to chat behind the scenes. We don't monitor that Twitter feed, so if you do have a question, do put it in the question box. The webinar is being recorded. All participants will receive an email with links to the recording and the presentation slides. And now here's Carl. There'll be a slight delay as we change presenters.
Thank you, Felicity. Before we kick right in, I'm going to first review the learning objectives for today's presentation. It's just a high-altitude view of the objectives. They're slightly more discrete than the ones that were printed on the website. So first off, what I'm going to do is go over a high-altitude roadmap for operational transition, meaning how do we get our people and this workflow systems that we use converted over. The second thing I want to cover is a roadmap for our data conversion, which is what it sounds like, talking about getting our MARC records over into BIBFRAME. As part of that, I'm going to review the available tools that we currently have and think a little bit about ones that are coming down the pipe, and then also talk about vendor engagement in this system and where they can play a role in that overall conversion. So one thing I want to note just quickly as a caveat to this process is that I'm going to be talking specifically about BIBFRAME, but these principles apply to any type of linked data transformation. So in some cases, people actually might be converting into multiple instantiations that are linked data oriented to serve particular audiences. Although I do want to say that one of the features of BIBFRAME, and the reason it's the bibliographic framework, is that it's not so much a namespace or an ontology in itself, but a framework for presenting those. So as the framework evolves, more and more types of ontologies will be represented there, which will allow us to finally bring together our archival work, our library cataloging, and various aspects of the work that we do. So I'm going to talk about this on two levels. One is what I call a dual axis of transformation, and that is transforming our data itself over as well as the human and machine systems that we use to deal with data, because both of those things have to be changing. And related to that is a dual axis of transition. And transition is the more finite, very discrete level of the MARC data itself, but then also our working in native linked data universe. So it's no longer a conversion process, but leading towards actually working natively in BIBFRAME and leaving that MARC world behind as much as we've loved it for these many years. So I'm going to give here just a brief overview of the very high altitude, and then I'm going to be talking about each of these boxes throughout the webinar as it progresses. So we really have a two-phase process. The first phase being this top bar, the second phase being that second bottom bar. And in that first phase is really about working behind the scenes to get our MARC converted over and get set up for the conversion. So in there we have a process of inserting URIs in our legacy records, and again, I'm going to talk in detail about each of these stages and steps. We also have a question of utilizing, in that second box, LD-enabled Workbench, how we can continue to work in a MARC world but capitalize on the linked data that's already being published out there. And then also then how we would use the APIs that are part of our existing infrastructure, nearly all ILSs and at all of our different vendors, to start working, connecting to the linked data universe. When we get to that phase 2, now we're in a hardcore moment of converting our MARC data over into BIBFRAME in mass, also starting to catalog in a linked data universe natively, and then finally what our discovery interfaces and our ILSs will look like and once we hit that world. So again, the main feature of that phase 1 is what I call having our MARC and eating it too, which is that we want to be in a universe where we can start to prepare for that conversion over to linked data without having to disrupt our workflows entirely. If we tried to just flip a switch overnight and say, starting tomorrow, we're going to convert every single record we have, we're going to convert everybody over to linked data universe, our work would effectively stop. We'd have a lot of lag time there while we're converting. So what we need to do is walk our way in through a process that lets us move in the background to starting to process our data and getting set up for conversion process while our cataloging efforts are still churning away in a MARC universe. Now, what I'm not going to talk about a lot today is the process of legacy URI insertion. This is the main function and the main factor involved in setting ourselves up for success. The main reason I'm not going to go into detail here is because we've had the two previous webinars in the series that focused on this particular issue. So very briefly, for those who did not attend those, when I say URI, what I'm talking about is a unique identifier that relates to something that was once in some type of authority list or control vocabulary. So whereas I might have the name of an author, Shakespeare, William, and whatever William's dates are, a URI would be a unique identifier that points to that is machine readable, which is important for linked data. So when we talk about legacy URI insertion, what we're talking about is keeping our MARC record, but somewhere in that MARC record, putting the URI that points to that William Shakespeare in our new linked data universe. And we had a whole session on that. So that's really all you need to understand. But because those URIs, they are the nuts and bolts of how linked data functions. That's really what we have to have for linked data to work. A process that allows us to start injecting those into MARC before we've moved cataloging out of MARC is a process that allows us to start moving towards linked data without disruption of our workflows. And that's crucial because there's a lot of work involved in that insertion. And we can, in fact, be doing it behind the scenes. As we do that work behind the scenes, the one change we want to make to our cataloging effort is a technical change, but actually not a change in workflow. So already this is a representative workbench where I'm looking at my MARC. I go in, I want to change a value somewhere. We already have built into our systems all types of auto lookups that show up where people, you select a thing, it gives you a pop-up window. This is something that's familiar to any cataloger who's doing anything other than just cataloging by hand. It's pretty much in a flat file. So the minor tweak that we want to make to our current Workbench systems is one that does an auto lookup. It adds auto lookup to a linked data source. So this is an example of just an experimental interface. And you can see we're here where I'm typing in an author name, and it's going to Library of Congress, BIOF, to various sources to identify a control, William Shakespeare, here's the authority, and then allows me to disambiguate there. And when I save that to my MARC, again in my MARC universe, I would simply save that. It would still look like the properly formed name string that we do already, but the system in the background is now capturing the URI that's associated with that. So that when a MARC record gets saved, it can be saved into the appropriate part of the MARC record. And as that previous slide showed, the PCC is working on that. They have a working group, and again, the other webinar focused on that. So that minor tweak to our interfaces, which is being done in a variety of contexts, again, we're also playing with sort of separate from the ILS interfaces that look just like a MARC cataloging interface, but have this additional functionality, and we have that. So this really is that future of that first phase. We're letting people stay in MARC. But those lookups, and we already have a variety of very high-profile sources that we can look up to grab those URIs. Library of Congress, OCLC hosts several, Getty, place names. So, and it's an ever-growing list of places we can go, and we just enhance our current workbenches slightly, and that allows us to start setting ourselves up for true linked data transformation. Once we've done that, again, those use these API models, right? So let's say that at UC Davis, so I'm not trying to give preference to the vendor, UC Davis, we use Alma. It's cloud-based, and Ex Libris is running pilots. Let's say Ex Libris tweaked that interface a little bit. We'd be working natively within them in the cloud, and we would be capturing those URIs. Another option is we work outside in our own workbench, and we use the API to push data into there. Also, our conversion efforts of the legacy data, where it's not a cataloger doing something new, those will rely on the APIs that are available in any major ILS system to get those converted records updated, right? So this is a very heavy API-intensive process, but importantly, that's a process that involves the technical services IT group, not the catalogers. So again, we can be working in this mode without disrupting our cataloging workflows, which is a main goal of that first phase. Once we finish that, our next area, we move to phase two. Phase two is the big transition phase, where things really are going to change. Because as we move into that phase two universe, again, looking at our overall high altitude view, it's in phase two that we start to go native linked data, which means that we're saying bye-bye to MARC and no longer thinking or working in that universe. It has two main stages that are coupled. One is now converting our legacy MARC that we've set up though for success by already inserting the URIs. And the other then is flipping over to a native linked data workbench, which will look and feel quite different from the MARC workbench that we are used to. And now, again, I'm going to talk about each one of these discretely. And then there is finally the question of how does this all interface with other ILS functions, with our discovery. And I'm going to address each of these in detail moving forward from here. So the first topic here is that of legacy MARC conversion. So at this point in the process, we've been working for a year or two, depending on the speed of effort at a local institution, getting URIs inserted in our legacy MARC records. With that, those records now have all the information that we need in them to do an automated conversion over into BIBFRAME. How we do that is the question, and the good news on that front is that we already have a variety of tools available that will help with that transition, and that improved versions of are also coming down the pipe. So this part here, again, is heavily technical services IT, won't really involve a disruption of the cataloging workflow, but will involve a major effort on that IT side of the house. And so that needs to be planned for. And when I say a major investment, I mean a major investment. So realistically, you could expect to have, I would say, depending on how your shop is set up, if you have an internal shop, this type of conversion ultimately would be a full-time job for at least one, if not two, people, depending on how large your record source is, your catalog. So you would need to plan for that in terms of human, labor power and also cost involved. The tools that are available to do this, I'm just going to review a few of what I think and we found through BibFlow to be the most ready to go right now. New tools will undoubtedly come, but these are ones that you could start playing with now, and they work. They already work, which is a huge update. It's not a future forward type of request. The first one that I want to alert you to is the Library of Congress's transformation tool. For each one of these, I want to take a general caveat to every one of the ones I'm going to show you I like and I think is an absolutely viable solution. When I talk about each one, I am going to say what I think are the pluses and minuses of those, because I think it will help you choose for yourself which one of those tools will work better in your technology ecosystem. But I do think, so I'm not actually critiquing any of them, I think they all actually work quite well, and it's really a matter of how you want to work with them, which one you would choose. So the first is this Library of Congress transformation tool. It is currently available as a web service. You can go play with it, but it is currently ported to the BibFrame 1.0 model. For those that don't know, we now have a BibFrame 2.0. It is significantly different than 1.0. 1.0, a lot of work went into playing with it, and now 2.0 is the improved version as a result of that work and testing. Library of Congress is currently working on the 2.0 tool, and it will be available both as a web service and, more importantly, as a downloadable software tool. Because you don't want to be trying to convert your whole catalog by submitting records, one at a time or even batches of 10 at a time over the network. It's much more efficient to run these locally. The advantage that this tool has, a major upside, is that it is pretty much guaranteed to pump out really good BibFrame. It's the Library of Congress that has led the initiative to develop BibFrame, and it's their tool. So one can feel confident that you are going to get solid workable BibFrame out of this tool. A potential downside to this is if you are one of those libraries that is interested in experimentation, pushing out data in multiple formats, not just BibFrame, say schema.org. So specifically, gearing towards a major search engine. You're heavily vested in archival work, and so you want to use other namespaces there. This tool will limit your capacity to do that, not exclude it, but it's not going to be what it's best at. So, you should think about where you stand on this continuum, right? Are you thinking predominantly about straight up production and moving forward, or do you want to be more of an experimenter in the space and push more into other areas? So that would be a decision-making criteria for me on this particular Library of Congress tool. Next tool I want to talk about is MARC Next, part of MARC Edit. This is a tool that almost anybody in library space is familiar with MARC Edit, on the cataloging side at any rate, in technical services. This, by the way, is a major advantage of this tool. It's one of the major advantages is that we know it. And a tool that you're familiar with is a tool that's easier to work with, even if you haven't worked with the conversion aspects of it that are in MARC Next. The overall tool is one that it will be familiar to people. And that really is a plus side. Another plus side is this opens itself more for those that want to be on the more experimental side. If you know already that you want to be converting data into multiple formats that work with each other, or you're thinking that you want to move more into an experimental mode and play with different ways of exposing your data, MARC Next, MARC Edit will do that. And it does that with a tool that allows you to use an XSLT. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but the way to think about this is you can give different sets of instructions to it using the main software package. And you say, okay, just run this set of instructions, and it'll pump it out this way, run this one, and it will work that way. So it's an XSLT based, so you would want to have XSLT expertise in your IT shop or to get it. that's a particular transformation tool. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of it. The potential, but it's a really great model because you can have these multiple instruction sets. It's very flexible. And it also, there is a library that Terry manages where you can submit, like people that create these transformations make them available to others. So you don't necessarily have to build your own. You can say, oh, somebody else made that one. I want to use that. I want to use that. So it's very useful in this regard. The downside to this potentially is that it really isn't designed as an application as a multiple sort of client-server-based application. It works that way, don't get me wrong. It's just not its primary design, which means that its efficiency of processing is just a tad slower, potentially, than other ones that work that way. And I say a tad because it is very functional application. But if you were really going to run transformations en masse regularly, but most importantly, you want those to be able to be managed by multiple people in an organization working on a central node of conversion, then this tool is not going to be necessarily your best tool. That's a unique use case. So again, unless you're in that use case, I think this is a great tool because of that flexibility that it offers. And it just works really well, as we all know. Another product I want to talk about, this is one that you don't hear a lot about. It's called the eXtensible catalog. It was developed with Mellon funding some years ago. Its main user right now is an organization called CARLI, which is the Consortium of Academic and Research Libraries in Illinois. And they use it to get records from all of the different libraries, compare them, munge them, and create a single catalog for the entire system. So it's well maintained because it's a large user group. It has other users, the National Library of Spain, the English Short Title Catalog. So it is in use, it's just not as well known. Its functionality is like the functionality that I described from MARC Edit. Where it's different is that it is designed specifically as a more client-server-based app. So when you're working in the eXtensible catalog, there's a web interface, and you can set that up so that any number of users in your environment can manage it and create what they call transformations, run services right from that web interface. So it's natively client-server built to run that way, which makes it very efficient at a processing speed level and in terms of an organizational workflow when you're working in that environment. It also, as I said, has that flexibility. You can run multiple transformations. It doesn't use XSLT. It uses JavaScript. So you write these JavaScripts that say, move this one to there, that one to there, that one to there, just as you did in MARC Next, but with XSLT. And then you set up a service and you say, run. And you run at regular intervals that you would choose. One thing I do want to point out here that I should have mentioned also with MARC Next and also with XC is that both of them allow you to just set up an OAI PMH connection to your existing catalog. So it can watch that catalog move, new things come in, boom, go, right? And then transform that one. So it has a high level of connectivity, both of those, to the other systems. And say what you want in the tech world, that there's a lot of anxiety and wanting to move beyond OAI PMH, but it works. And as long as we're moving anyway to a whole other system, both of those products, the fact that they connect that way, allows you a really good way so you don't have to by hand grab all your MARC records, export them, and re-import them into something else. Another option for you is, of course, homegrown scripting. So we use this too, both for BibFlow and for the English Short Title Catalog, which I work on. We've experimented with this. And the advantage to homegrown scripting, if you have the technical expertise to do this, it, by definition, has all of the flexibility you could possibly ever want because you're working in the code yourself. It also has the advantage that it can be lightning fast, because depending on the language that you're using, you can build these things and just run them natively, and you are off to the races. So it's your most flexible, most lightning speed way to do this, but on the downside, it's also your most expensive. It costs time and money to build these, and you have to have the technical expertise in-house to manage them and run them. So you would really want to, we use them because we really want to be experimenting, and because we're experimenting, we're frequently processing huge numbers of the same record over and over and over again, and so there's a huge payout for us to work this way. So unless you really want to be in that high experimental group, I wouldn't recommend going with some homegrown scripts. If you do, the good news is a lot of these are available. If you ask a friend, you could probably get some as a starting place and move from there and tweak from there. But you would only, again, really want to do this if you really want to be on that experimental front. Otherwise, going with an existing tool will give you that, the range of different use cases where you see yourself fitting in your overall library operations, and will work wonderfully for you at a much cheaper cost. So the other thing I wanted to ask, though, in this thing is, and hopefully if there are some vendors in the audience here, it's where have all the vendors gone in this process? Since we're talking about mass conversion of records, this is a perfect spot for a service to be offered by a vendor, and especially because we're talking about mass conversion of a huge number of overlapping records. We all have the same things in our catalogs, not everything the same, but a lot that's the same. And we currently do have a system where we benefit from that, vendors communicating with OCLC, records getting pulled down, we're not creating them, and that works quite well. What we'd be talking about here is the setting up of a legacy service that will allow us to say, look, I've got this, 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 and this, you just munge it for me and send it back. And then also we know that my copy looks like your copy looks like your copy because they're being munged one time and then being distributed. So for those who don't know, munge in the technical world is the, kind of technical term. It's technical slang for doing these kind of transformations. So there's really a role, and it's not that we don't have any vendor work going on in this area. If you're talking about straight up record conversion for you, Zepheira has done and is continuing to do a lot of work for research libraries, a lot of work particularly in the public library sector. They will help you take your records and get them converted over. They're also working with the American Antiquarian Society, so they're doing a lot of archival type of work and getting those things converted. So I don't mean to suggest that there is no vendor activity there. What I do mean to suggest is to put out there the hope, and we are talking to a lot of vendors out there, that a service will evolve and present itself in the next year or so, because that will decrease the cost overall for smaller libraries to be able to handle this process. One of the things I want to, before we move on, I just want to, again, anchor this whole conversion process to say that if you engage in the previous phase one that was discussed in depth again in the previous two webinars of getting URIs inserted into your MARC records before you start the conversion process, that conversion process will go oh so much more smoothly and be a lot less painful, and what you end up with in the end will be solid BIBFRAME. So I highly recommend that before you start mass conversion, you start down the path of URI insertion. Next, I want to turn to now, once you've got tools in place, we're converting en masse all of our records. This is the moment that we want to move to cataloging in the cloud, or at a minimum with the cloud, so that we're cataloging in a native linked data environment. What I mean by that is our whole cataloging effort is devoted to pumping out the equivalent of records. They really aren't records, we call them graphs, but you're sitting down, you're doing your work, and it is actually nevermore being saved as MARC. It's being saved primarily as BibFlow. That becomes the communicative standard record for your system. I put it in that odd phrasing because one of the things people get a lot of anxiety about the raw data structure of BIBFRAME, and that catalogers have to know, sort of like to read the RDF. That's not really necessary. You know, just like whatever ILS you are in right now, I guarantee that that database that it stores the data in does not look like a flat MARC file. I guarantee it. None of them do. You do your cataloging and the screen looks like MARC to you, and then it's getting saved in a relational database almost all the time. Still looks nothing like that. And cataloging efforts work phenomenally well, and catalogers know nothing right now about the underlying data storage platform. They know a lot about the data model, which is the MARC, but not the storage. And that's an important distinction, because at some level, even when we move into native linked data, it really doesn't matter to your cataloger that it's being stored as a triple. And they don't have to understand the ins and outs of how triples work and how RDF functions. What they do have to understand, however, is the model, the difference in the model, how things can be said, and what can be said. And in several previous webinars, and the Library of Congress has said this repeatedly, there's this discussion of, do you try to slowly migrate people over and sort of map, let the individual cataloger map MARC to BIBFRAME? And like a lot of other people, my suggestion is no. You don't really need to know how to do that. That it's better to just flip a switch with the cataloger. And it's okay, because the cataloger knows what the information is that they've been getting into every pile, into every slot and field and MARC. They know that information. So the better move is to take a cataloger and say, okay, here's your new interface. Here's what the model looks like as represented in the interface, and then here's where you put that information. That's a much easier mind leap. But just as we've made transitions before with ARC and with RDA, most people found in those cases that you just said, okay, here, just change your mind, and here's what we're going to do. So at some level, it is a flip of a switch. It's sort of the recommended when you're in phase 2 is just, here's your new interface, here's how to use it. Let's train you how to work in the new world. But there is also a little out here. You don't have to flip the switch with every cataloger on the same day. So that allows you to take, so at Davis here, our experimental model is take one particular group that's working on a particular type of cataloging, flip the switch for them. Then take another one, flip the switch for them. That allows you to keep your training costs down because you can use the same trainer over time with different groups. It allows you to have less disruption to your overall workflow because you're not suddenly just shutting down every portion of your shop and moving over. So the question is now, when I say flip them over, like we're going to move to this whole new universe, what does that interface look like, right? There are a couple of different things out there, different approaches to this interface. And I honestly don't think there will ever be just one interface. MARC is so flat file oriented, so field oriented, and it sort of makes sense. You represent the fields in a numeric kind of order. So regardless of what ILS you're in, the interface kind of looks the same. I mean, a MARC record looks like a MARC record. Because the BIBFRAME model is more complicated, there are various ways to skin this cat, and it's possible that over the long haul we drive towards one common kind of interface, but my prediction is there's always going to be more subtleties and flexibility. So what we're looking at here on your screen is a currently existing, it works, Library of Congress BIBFRAME editor. It's right now, what you see on my screen is a screenshot from what is a server-side demonstration tool only. It's not a usable system for your whole cataloging effort. And this version is again linked to BIBFRAME 1.0. But importantly, there is a downloadable software 2.0 version coming, and that's really your production level one that you could run locally, install the software, and start cataloging native linked data. It has, in addition to representing the BibFlow model, it also has a lot of cool linked data functionality that we're going to look at in a second and talk about. But if you look at this screen, what you see is that the fields here that you're looking at, the labels on the fields are very, you know, as you can see, they're RDA specific, right? So this approach is model-centric in the sense that it says, okay, I'm starting with this type of thing. It's using language that the cataloger knows, and it's referring itself to a previous framework. But it doesn't require a cataloger to go in ahead of time and sort of learn a whole mental map of, like, this RDA part goes here, that one goes there. When they're looking at the interface, they're seeing it right there. Okay, I know what that is. You hit it and you go. And again, this is working software. You can download it, work with it, and again, it's Library of Congress. The BIBFRAME that this pumps out will be solid, and you can count on that. Here's another example. It's the Zepheira Scribe tool. This is one we've played with a lot here at UC Davis. It takes a different view of that universe, which is it doesn't have, you'll notice if you look at the labels, it doesn't have reference the RDA or these other rule sets. And the idea behind this is once we enter a linked data world where we're starting to look up things, as I'll show in a second, via URIs and that type of universe, there isn't the same, there's less, I have to type this string in and make it look exactly the way it should. And there's more looking it up and saying, that's it. So in many ways, the rule itself is less relevant as a rule. So you can understand more, well, this is a primary author, this is a secondary author. So what you need are more of these human readable names for fields. I don't want to say it's what you need, it's what this approach takes, right? And some of it as we move forward is going to be experimentation. And these are just two examples, right? Another example is I could just say I'm starting with the work. I'm literally just going to duplicate the model top down. And this is going to have to come out in the wash. The good news is this will come out in the wash, and we're actually not in a huge hurry here because, again, if you follow the plan I'm outlining here, you're going to spend another significant amount of time, even if you were very aggressive, another year or two, just getting your URI into your MARC. So these tools don't have to really be available today because you wouldn't, on this plan, you wouldn't start using them today. And they very much, we have high level of usability and experimentation. They will be available by the time we really need them. This is the kind of lookup we saw this before. Again, if I'm just in an author field, I type it up. It's going to inherit all the correct formatting as long as I choose the right one and the URI. So another sort of advantage I just want to mention while we're here and how our workflows are going to change. So this is the system we actually have up. It works at Davis. We built a little system that lets me just scan an ISBN for copy cataloging with a barcode. It goes to OCLC Works. It pulls it up. It says, which of these is the one that you're actually looking at? I go, that's the one. And it just builds the entire record automatically from that point on. So it's, in that case, I don't even need a real interface at that point. Now, we still have an interface because you might want to look at it and change it. But it's a, a new kind of sort of shelf-ready work that we're doing there. So, workflows are going to change significantly in this area, and many times they're going to change and become much more efficient, as well as providing better data. So that's the type of thing we can expect. Now, one thing that comes up then is that last box, and it's the question of discovery layer and integration with the rest of our universe. We already have discovery layers that work. The one I'm going to mention, there are several of them, is Blacklight. A lot of people are familiar, they've at least heard of that. And what's interesting about Blacklight is Blacklight has a MARC version, but its first version, like its real iteration, is linked data native. It's built to do RDF. That's that's how it was born. So it's box ready to work in this universe. Some configuration has to go on, of course, to match your data model. And we also have tools right out of the box that will already index the triples that get put out. So remembering that when we're in a linked data universe, the output of that is no longer MARC. The output is a straight triple store graph. And so one of the common ones that people use now is a product called Apache Lucene, Solar. You don't have to know this. The important thing is that it exists. As it stands today, I can stand up fairly quickly a discovery layer to my linked data triple store. And this is just one of many options, especially on the data storage level and the indexing level. There are a lot of different graph databases that will let you do this. So this part isn't really future forward in terms of having a really nice discovery layer, search and discovery layer for those records. We're there, and we could do it. And again, over the next couple of years, as we're all converting over, these are going to get better and better. I want to talk, though, about ILS integration. And what I mean by that is not necessarily, not connecting this to our current ILS, but we have a ILS that we're using that does a lot more than just a search and discovery layer, right? It handles our purchasing, it handles the circulation, all these aspects, and we do have to get this connected to those functions. And the good news on that, sorry, that was a little premature. The good news on that is that many vendors are already experimenting with this. There's pilot projects happening right now with we're putting these things together into a functional universe. So it's really not something that we're going to need to worry about. As libraries, if we can get to the point where we're pumping out the RDF, the universe will be there. One interesting thing about that potential universe, though, that I want to mention is that it's really not clear in this universe that we need an integrated library system. We may more need a de-integrated library system. Because we have this very common data model now that lies in the bottom underneath it, we could theoretically have a black-white search and discovery on top and use a straight-out-of-the-box inventory system, of which there are thousands of commercial options there to manage the actual inventory itself as things get purchased and come in and as circulation happens. So this is an area that a lot of work is going to be done on, I think, over the next couple of years, and experimenting, figuring out what do we really need in terms of library operations in this new system. But again, we have time for that. The one caveat thing I want to talk to you very just briefly to introduce, which is a potential pain point here, and it's where workflows are going to change dramatically, and the data is going to change even more dramatically, is the question of authorities. So we've been looking at these lookups, and I've talked about them as you look things up several times now. But the issue that we have to solve is what happens when I get this. Nothing, right? I go to look it up, and there's no there there. There's nowhere for me to look this up. Now, we currently have systems, NACO, and we have various systems for dealing with this, and they all work fundamentally the same way, which is there's some core central point of proliferation. I need something new, so I've looked it up from there. I need something new, I create it, and I send it on, right? And it goes there. Now, in some cases, if I'm a NACO participant or in different situations, I'm lucky enough that I can count on the fact that what I put into my record is going to be the new one, and so I'm not going to have to go back and change my record. But there's also a high probability in a lot of contexts that in the current world what happens is I have to go back and change. It gets to wherever that central point is, and they say, no, that already exists, or whatever. We want to avoid that in the linked data universe. So this type of pure centralized authority is going to change. If we don't fix it, though, we have what I call linkless open data. If we're all just running around minting our own URIs and there's no attempt to coordinate or consolidate those, then things fall apart very quickly. And our whole universe, effectively, we have no authority anymore, and none of our records talk to each other. So this is a problem that has to be solved. In linked data land, one approach to that, conceivably, is we could just all libraries be talking to each other. I could ping everybody else in the universe, say, give me everything you've got that looks like this, instead of just looking in a central place, disambiguate automatically and say, that's the one I want. And now we're sharing URIs. This really would work, but it is, in terms of network traffic and computation, extremely a heavy load, and so not optimal, really, in terms of functionality. So really, I do believe there's consensus on this. The people who are really working on authority, there's a large IMLS project that's centered at Cornell University right now, the library there, and we just had a big gathering for that, and pretty much universal consensus that the solution here is a reconciliation service. I want to be able to mint mine on my own. I want to send it to you. I don't want to get back a universe that says, okay, no, here's what it looks like now. What I want you to do is keep track of that and what other ones it relates to. I want that service out there to say, this is the same as that one, is the same as that one. If somebody else mints their own local URI, that goes in the list. So all of these URIs are same person or the same subject or the same place. Linked data can handle this quite well because we can traverse those same apps. You know, all I need to know is one, and if I can go to that reconciliation and say, give me all the other ones, then I can start to go out in the world and grab all those other ones too. So all of my search and discovery works, all my traversal works, and it's much more efficient than either having the entire single record live in one place or the alternative where I have to ping everybody in the universe to get their data. So that sort of future of the authority work really will look like I mint a URI up in the top left here, either through a service. At University of California, we use a thing called EasyID, so I'm not at Davis Library. I go to EasyID, I get a URI. I say that's now the URI of my catalog. That's what my cataloger works with. They've entered a string that goes along with that, the human readable version. I submit that to my reconciliation service. That reconciliation service says, okay, that's part of this one, this one, this one. They're all the same, and then everybody else in the universe can make use of this. This looks very much like, I want to give a shout out here. OCLC already ran a pilot, and there's a phase 2 coming for name, historical person reconciliation, and where they're doing exactly this, and it worked really well. You know, we pushed around on that, and it really allowed us to traverse. So I think authority creation is going to become much more efficient in this new universe, and it will just be a matter of a cataloger working in the record going, typing it, nope, it's not there, so here's the name I want. This is what the string looks like, and boom, it just creates one, and you never have to go back to that record again because the reconciliation with the outside world is happening in the outside world. In that, though, you haven't provided much information that's truly authority, right? You've created a URI. So in that authority process, you have to send information to that group, to whoever that reconciling agency is, so that they can disambiguate. But more importantly, now our authority work grows, because I go from URI to authority to a context-driven authority, where now, because of that reconciliation, I can see, well, what did you say about it, and you say about it, and you say about it. And that's going to change dramatically. I think this is the biggest change that this transformation is going to bring into our universe as we move forward here. It will make the cataloging more efficient, and it will make ultimately the web of information, the context we can put around authorities, much thicker and more robust. And so, you know, that kind of leads from the technical and workflow benefit to the real true benefit of this, which is I want to know if I'm looking at William Shakespeare, I actually want to be able to traverse all the various ways that someone may have referred to him or to a particular subject. And so this all drives towards that end game of the true benefit of linked data. So with that, I'm going to end the presentation and turn it over, and we'll field some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. That was great. In some ways, I feel like, yeah, just going through the whole process, I feel like I understand it a little better. So I want to encourage everyone to send questions in or comments. And I want to start off with one. So here's how I understand part of the process if I want to do it in-house. My first step is get URIs in the record in relevant fields. Then I'm going to get a transformation service, transformation XSLT, for instance. And then you said set up a service. So later, I want to make sure I got this connection. Later you said Lucene or Apache Solar for a triple store, and Blacklight possible as a discovery layer. So is that the kind of service I would set up to make it all work?
So yeah, to get start to finish, right? Because what we're doing is we're moving from MARC ultimately to an output that's pure triples, right? It's in the data itself lives in BIBFRAME. The question is, what do we do with that BIBFRAME? And it has to go into some kind of system that can index that so that you can search it. And it's not just an end user search. Anytime you go into your ILS now and you look something up to do something to it, you searched for it. So you have to have a system that can do that can understand the data. And so when I say like the Apache, the Solar Lucene, that's a particular really sort of data store agnostic way of indexing these triples. You know, it'll handle all kinds of different data. You give it to it, it'll index it, and it'll make it discoverable and deliverable. so you can get that data. Once you've done that, so that's your underlying database. So for people that have database experience, that would be equivalent of like MySQL or a SQL database that we use in a relational database world, which is where all of our MARC is stored in some form of relational database. So you need that database that can handle the triple store. And that's just one example. There's all kinds of graph-based databases that are out there that you can use. Neo4j, Level Graph, there's a bunch of them. Then what happens is you take a product like Blacklight that you attach to the database, right? And that gives you a way to display that data. I did also want to point out, though, I used that word transform at another point, which is in that process, like you said with the XSLT, if I was using MARC next, that's also a transformative process, right? That's where I'm actually transforming the data from the MARC to the BIBFRAME, which has to be done before you can store it in a native triple store database, before you can then display it in a native linked data search and discovery interface. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yes. Okay, here's practical questions we've gotten. What level of staff do you recommend for the legacy MARC conversion? You mentioned that that would be the IT people might be doing that in-house.
Yes. So was that the end of the question?
Yes.
Yes. So for that, it depends on how the size of your catalog. I would say, though, for your average university or any type of research library catalog, someone that's got unless you're a very small specialized library, let me put it that way, I think that the expertise that you need for that is twofold. I would want to dedicate a pretty much full-time, if you could do it, or half-time over a longer period of time, but you're going to spend a year in this process with somebody who is a sysadmin type person that can manage the servers, manage keeping your transformation software up and running. There's a lot of sysadmin work that has to go into this process. And you are also going to want somebody, depending on which system you're using, who understands the scripting language involved in writing and managing those transformations. And I think that person is, for that first year, is probably full-time for the first 3 months, and then could become 50% work effort after that.
Okay.
I really think those are accurate sort of figures that you should count on.
Okay. Yeah, there's several questions about URIs. Let me grab a couple of those.
Okay.
So one person mentions that they have URIs in their records that don't display, so they're associated with a file, but how does that relate to the first stage of associating URIs?
So in this process of inserting a URI into the MARC, you aren't doing anything but setting yourself up for the transformation to BIBFRAME. Those URIs won't be visible to anybody. They won't really function, serve a functional purpose even in working with the MARC. They really don't. I mean, you could work to let people see them. Personally, I don't think there's a lot of benefit to flooding people with, a URI is ugly and messy to a human. It's not meant for a human. It's meant for a machine to read. So there really isn't any benefit at all if you were just going to stay in MARC land and never do anything else. The real benefit of getting them there is that you've set yourself up for the conversion, because if you converted to linked data, which one could do, and all you did was dump string data in there, you don't have really a useful record that can function in a linked data universe. So it doesn't matter that you can't display it, is my point there. It only has to be, you just have to have some way to see that it's there and to get it in there if you're the person doing the insertion. So that I would refer you directly to the PCC core. They have a white paper that they published on this that talks about the various processes that they have used to accomplish that. And and from that you can glean what the work effort would be involved and the costs. And that's really your best way to go. But don't worry about that you can't see them once they're there right now. It's not what it's about.
Okay. Two people ask about working it whether it's worth taking the time to work in BIBFRAME 1 when BIBFRAME 2 is coming, or would it be better to wait for BIBFRAME 2? And is that going to be the final version?
There's never going to be a final version. And that's okay, though, because once things get structured, it becomes significantly easier to move towards an ever-evolving data model. And MARC didn't stay stable, but it just moved more slowly than we're going to move here. If you have not touched BIBFRAME at all, if you are previously not engaged in it, my recommendation, and people are going to disagree with me on this, but I stand behind it firmly, is I would wait for BIBFRAME 2. If you're already there, then I think it's stay in that sandbox, keep working, because you'll understand it better when you make the transformation. But if you haven't even moved down that road, I would wait, personally, till 2.
Okay. Can you tell us when and at what cost will the Library of Congress transformation and editing downloadable software be available?
I can't, unfortunately. It will be, the software they will distribute for free is my understanding, but I'm not the final word on that. But I wouldn't expect that to be a cost. They're devoting a lot of time and effort to developing that, and they want it to be used. Time frame, unfortunately I don't know, and I would hate to say something that isn't true, put words in their mouth, but I would expect it actually fairly soon. I mean, I know they're working quite hard on it, so I don't think it's good. We're not talking a 3-year horizon. If it doesn't come out in the next year, I'd be very surprised.
Okay. Can you talk more about how the linked data authority reconciliation services would work? Could much of the work of reconciliation be automated, or will a lot of human intervention be needed?
So much of the work can be automated. So what is happening right now, and there's been a lot of discussion, the OCLC has really been working hard on this. And so if anybody out there participated, those who didn't, basically what it does is I've got an ID, you've got an ID, you've got an ID, these are all the same thing, right? So I can query it with any ID, and it gives me back all the other ones that are about the same thing. And much of that work can be done in an automated way, because if enough data is sent along, right? So the idea here is if I've created a new name, I'm going to send along with that the whole rest of the record, everything else I've said about the thing that caused me to create that name. That provides a good context for automated reconciliation. And any type of automated process, that's sort of what people talk about, is it's about probabilities. It's not about for sures, right? And you can have good algorithms that say, look, given what we know, there is a 90% chance that this is good, right? Given what we know, there is really only a 45% chance. So based on those, a P number, things get put in piles. If it's a 98% chance, that's as good, if not better, than you would get with a human read. No one likes to hear that, but it's true. Our data is not perfect as it is. We call it good, and it goes. As you move down there, it goes to various levels of triage, right? But a significant portion of what we have out there once this conversion happens will all just happen automatically and will be reliable.
Great. We have a lot of questions here. We have time for one more, but I want to assure everyone else that Carl has agreed to answer the rest of the questions offline, and the answers will be sent out to all attendees. So let me end with this one. Do the transformation services generate both BIBFRAME work and BIBFRAME instance descriptions and sort out the MARC data between them?
This is a great question. It depends on which one you're using, and I don't know, for example, with the Library of Congress one, how sophisticated when they roll out the next version it's going to be. With the ones that are allow more creativity and more intervention on your part, you can write those scripts so that they do lookups, right? So I have some experimental stuff on my desk that absolutely does that. I'm able to go to OCLC Works based on what I have, get a very strong disambiguation, and actually deal with work versus instance, no problem, and all the way down that chain. So it is entirely possible, and you know, we already have services that will let you configure that. I would be shocked and amazed if the more off-the-shelf services don't have that baked in as we move forward, because it's really essential to the effort at this point.
Great. Thank you. There are more questions on reconciliation, the authority control, copy cataloging. So we'll send those to Carl and send the answers out when we get those. So unfortunately, yeah, we've used up our time. So I want to thank you, Carl, for this great presentation.
Thank you.
So we're glad everyone could be with us today. You're soon going to be getting the email with a link to the recording, slides, and a short online evaluation form. So please take time to complete that evaluation form, because the CE committee uses that to plan our future events. I also want to thank again Carl, our presenter, and members of our Continuing Education Committee, Mary Reeder and Catherine Balick, also the ILS office staff, Megan Doherty. Those three people have helped with the technical aspects of this webinar to make sure it runs smoothly. We have some other upcoming webinars. So Carl's was one of a series of 6. 2 more are following this. On November 9th, we have modeling and encoding serials in BIBFRAME. And on November 16th, a webinar on linked data cataloging workflows. So those are going to build on some of the things Carl has talked about. And then we have 2 other ones to round out our fall series. November 30th, budget transparency and collection development. December 7th, research data management best practices and REDCap. So I hope you'll join us for some of those. CE committee also presents web courses scheduled throughout the year. Acquisitions, cataloging, collection assessment, collection development, electronic resources and preservation. Those are 4 to 6 week courses. And e-forums. We have one coming up on social media for technical services and collection development librarians. Thank you again for joining us. That ends our session today.